2 years ago, I bought an abandoned Alfa Romeo GTV. I was out with my Giulia TI and this guy came up to me in a parking lot and said, "Hey, I have an old GTV in a shed and it's been there since 1983 and I'm thinking about selling it. Would you like to come have a look at it?" And I don't know how to say no to a new project car, so I was there immediately. This guy opened up the doors on his old shed and there it was, a 1972 Alfa Romeo 1750 GTV in a, well, let's just say you needed to have some real vision in order to see the potential there. He had bought the car like this in 1983, partially stripped, the interior was out, the glass was out, it was bare primer, and it was a non-runner. It sat like this for 35 years, which left it looking pretty rough. And I like to think of myself as a man of vision, plus I'm a sucker for a project car, so we hauled it into the sunshine, made a deal, and I loaded it onto a trailer. And that is how I ended up with this 1972 GTV. And I'm pretty happy with it. The VIN number on this chassis is AR1454145, which is oddly satisfying. If we take a look in the Fuzi manual, it's not there. The right-hand drive numbers end in 1971. Because this book only goes to 1972, so it's safe to assume that this car was built in the last year of production for right-hand drive, which was 1972. When I found the car, it had a 2000cc engine installed that was totally seized. But in the parts that came with the car, there was the original 1750cc engine, with numbers that matched the build plate that the assemblers in South Africa riveted to the inner fender. Even though this car looked like a bare shell, it was totally complete. All the parts were included in the sale, but they were just as rough as the rest of the car. All that time sitting apart in a dusty shed had really taken a toll. Everything was pretty beat up and pretty filthy. Although everything was there, it all needed work. There weren't any parts on this car that could just go back in without any attention. The body of the car was in fairly good shape, all things considered. There was a little rust in the usual places, but overall, it was solid. I got the car on my lift and had a look at the underside. There were a couple spots in the floor that needed work, and the spare wheel well had been filled in with fiberglass. Overall, a good starting point for a project. My original plan for the GTV was to build it into a rat rod, something that would be relatively easy and cheap to do, just to have a fun, fast, and loud Alfa that I didn't have to worry too much about. I was going to leave it in bare primer, fit the glass, find a new dashboard for it, and rebuild the mechanicals and the electrical system, and then just drive it as it was. So I started the process of stripping the GTV down to a totally bare shell, so I could really see what I was working with. I started out by disassembling the underside of the car, like the exhaust and all the brackets and the prop shaft and the steering drag link. Then I removed the seized 2000 series engine and gearbox. As great as an Alfa 2000 twin cam is, there's something really special about the 1750. There's no way that I could have the original 1750 and not put it back in the car. Plus, this 2000 may live on one day in another one of my cars. I dropped out the brakes, the suspension, which was a little tricky because there were multiple seized bolts. I pulled out all the hydraulic lines, and on a right-hand drive model there are a lot of hydraulic lines. Everything had to be removed, even down to the steering gear and the old insulation under the dashboard and on the floors. This car was pretty filthy and worn out, so I wanted to get everything out because everything needed attention. Once the car was totally bare, I built a rotisserie for it with large octagonal hoops so I could roll the car over on its side and really get into the rust repair properly. It's just about impossible to get the underside of a classic car looking good without being able to turn it on its side. This way, it's just so much easier to weld and easier to paint. But before I started with any rust repair, I sent the car off to the media blasters to clean out the underside and the interior, as well as the wheel arches and the engine bay. And it came back from the media blasters looking pretty good. There weren't any really nasty surprises that I could spot immediately. However, as soon as I started cutting away at the small rust holes in the lower fenders, it became clear that the sills, although pretty neat from the outside, had creeping rust within them. All 3 layers of the sills were rotten at the base of the A-pillar on both sides, and the radiator crossmember was starting to rot out as well. As I dug deeper into the body, I found that the rear bumper mount on the passenger side of the car was made almost entirely out of fiberglass. I was not going to be able to just reassemble this car and forget about all that damage. And this was about the time that I decided to forget about the whole rat rod idea and come up with some new plans for the GTV. When I pulled the seized engine out and pressure washed the engine bay, the black paint that had been sprayed over the whole engine bay peeled away to reveal the original factory paint, which was a very 1970s yellow ochre. At the time, I had been following the adventures of the little ochre Alfa on Instagram, and I thought that the color was so cool and it worked really well on the GT shape. So inspired by that car, I decided that the only thing to do was to return the GTV to its factory yellow paint and to restore it properly, and maybe add in a couple of upgrades along the way. Step 1 would be getting the metalwork right. I started at the sills. After cutting out all the rust and making up repair patches where I could, I ordered new A-pillar bases, new outer sills, and new fender repair panels. These new outer sill panels came from Classic Alfa in England, and they fit really well, although it's still a long process getting the door gaps right, and getting the doors to shut easily. If you've ever owned a 105 GT, you'll probably remember how hard you had to slam the doors just to get them to latch properly. I installed the rubber seals onto the car, fitting them in as far as I could before welding the sills in for good. I wanted to make sure that the doors on this car did open and shut easily. The passenger door was pretty good, but the driver's door is still a pain to open and shut. This required a modification to the driver's door frame, moving the seal profile in the door frame to a point where it was no longer crushing the seal. And this is the point where I kind of lost track of the project. The Duetto build kind of took over my life with its endless engine and gearbox trouble. The GTV ended up in the corner of the workshop for most of the year, unloved, much like it had been for all those years in the shed. That's why, if you've been following the channel, you've probably spotted it tucked away in a corner. But the Duetto is finally done, and I've pulled it back out of the corner, and I'm ready to take on this project again. I need a 105 GT in my life. It's been way too long. There's still a really long road ahead for this car. I'm not done with the rust just yet, and there's some accident damage that really needs sorting out properly. Not to mention that this car needs a total mechanical rebuild. The engine is in 1,000 pieces on my workbench at the moment. And the interior is beyond trashed, and I'm not even sure what to do about stuff like the dashboard. But we'll get into all of that in good time. With the Duetto Spider project finally done, it's time to close that chapter of this channel's history. Although the GTV isn't technically new to me or even new to the channel, you can find old videos about it from back in 2018. It's going to be the new main project on this channel for the next year or so. I have decided to start fresh here at a new episode 1, to catch up all my new subscribers on the history of this car so far, and to summarize exactly why I'm starting a new build series at this point. Sometimes it's helpful to come back to a project and treat it as if it's something new, with a fresh approach and fresh eyes. There will be some little side projects on the channel over the next year, mostly vintage motorcycle stuff. But now we're entering the era of the GTV build, and I really hope you guys enjoy following the process. But before I end this video, I just want to say thanks to all the new subscribers who've joined over the last few months, and thanks to the veteran subscribers who've been here since I found this GTV and from before the Spider build became a thing. The support has really been great. I also want to, as always, say a big thank you to everyone over on Patreon. You guys are awesome, and it helps out in a really big way. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you all in the next episode.